The tension in the room was suffocating as Ibrahim Traoré stared silently at Wei Zhang, CEO of Golden Dragon Mining. Around them, 20 armed guards stood motionless, unsure which leader to protect. No one expected what would happen next when Traoré slid a single photograph across the polished conference table, an image that would change the fate of Burkina Faso's resources forever. Zhang's eyes widened as he recognized the aerial photograph, a massive toxic waste pool hidden behind his company's Tambao mine, carefully concealed from government inspectors. The poisonous orange liquid had already seeped into groundwater, serving 3 villages. "Explain this," Traoré said, his voice deceptively soft. Zhang straightened his $8,000 suit jacket, composing himself. "A minor operational oversight, Mr. President. Nothing that can't be fixed with proper arrangements." He reached for his briefcase. "Perhaps we could discuss compensation that would be mutually beneficial?" The room fell silent. Everyone understood what mutually beneficial meant. The bribe offer hung in the air like a toxic cloud. What no one in that room knew was how Traoré had obtained this photograph, or what else he might know. And they certainly couldn't have predicted what the young president would do next. 2 days. Earlier, Traoré had received a desperate message from Amara Konate, a village elder from Tambao. Children were falling ill with mysterious rashes and stomach pains. Livestock were dying. The village water had turned a strange color. Instead of sending officials, Traoré had done something unprecedented. He disguised himself as a common laborer and traveled to the mine. Working a 14-hour shift alongside his countrymen, he witnessed firsthand the human cost of Golden Dragon's operations. At night, he slipped away and captured evidence of the environmental devastation with a small drone. Now facing the man responsible, Traoré remained motionless as Zhang opened his briefcase to reveal stacks of cash, millions of dollars in unmarked bills. 20 million. "Just for you," Zhang whispered, sliding the briefcase toward Traoré. A small price for continued cooperation. The guards shifted uncomfortably. Marie, Traoré's trusted aide, held her breath. This was more money than most Burkinabé would see in 100 lifetimes. Traoré looked at the money, then back at Zhang. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and placed something else on the table. A small vial of dark red liquid. "What is this?" Zhang asked, confused. "Blood," Traoré replied simply. "From 8-year-old Fatima Konate. She died yesterday from kidney failure after drinking water from the river your mine poisoned." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mr. Zhang," Traoré continued, his voice now steel, "I am not here to negotiate. I am here to inform you that Golden Dragon Mining's license in Burkina Faso is revoked, effective immediately. You have 72 hours to evacuate all foreign personnel." Zhang's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You can't do this. We have a contract. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? My company has the full backing of Beijing." Traoré stood slowly, his 6'4" frame towering over the conference table. "And I have the backing of the Burkinabé people. Let's see which proves stronger." The Chinese executive's face reddened. "You're making a grave mistake. Your tiny country can't survive without our investment. Who will build your roads? Your schools? Your hospitals?" "We will," Traoré answered calmly. "With our own hands if necessary, but we will no longer trade our children's blood for your roads." As Traoré turned to leave, Zhang called after him. "You'll regret this. Every other mining company will flee. Burkina Faso will become a pariah state." Traoré paused at the door. "Perhaps, but at least our children will live to see it." No one knew it then, but the confrontation that had just unfolded would trigger a cascade of events that would reshape not just Burkina Faso, but the entire relationship between African nations and foreign extraction companies. Within hours, Zhang was on his private jet back to Beijing, making frantic calls. By the time he landed, Golden Dragon Mining's stock had already begun to plummet. But Zhang wasn't concerned about stock prices. He was worried about explaining to his government how he had lost access to one of Africa's richest manganese deposits. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, an emergency cabinet meeting had been called. Government. Ministers sat in stunned silence as Traoré explained his decision. Mr. President, Finance Minister Ouedraogo finally ventured. Golden Dragon provides 22% of our national budget. Without their royalties, we will find other ways, Traoré interrupted. But sir, the Chinese will retaliate. They'll call in our infrastructure loans. They'll pressure other investors to pull out. We could lose billions. Traoré nodded gravely. I'm aware of the cost, Minister. But tell me, what is the cost of doing nothing? How many more children must die before it becomes too expensive? The room fell silent again. Then Traoré revealed the second part of his plan, a strategy so audacious that even his closest advisors gasped. From today, we nationalize all mining operations in Burkina Faso. No more foreign exploitation. Our minerals will be extracted by our people for our people. Defense Minister Kabore stood up, alarmed. Sir, with respect, we don't have the technology or expertise to run these mines ourselves. Then we will learn, Traoré replied. Other nations have done it, why not us? What followed was 72 hours of fevered activity. As predicted, China responded with fury, freezing assets and threatening sanctions. Western countries, initially sympathetic, quickly grew concerned about the nationalization plan, fearing their own interests might be next. The international media descended on Ouagadougou, most predicting economic catastrophe for the small West African nation. Burkina Faso commits economic suicide, read one headline. Traoré's folly will doom his people, declared another. Yet amid the chaos, something unexpected began to happen. 4 days after the confrontation, as Traoré was visiting Tambao to assess the environmental damage firsthand, his aide Marie approached with a strange message. Sir, we've received an unusual call from South Africa. Mamelodi Sundowns Mining wants to speak with you urgently. Traoré frowned. Another foreign company trying to take Golden Dragon's place? Tell them we're not interested. That's just it, sir, Marie said, her eyes wide with surprise. They're not foreign, they're African-owned, and they're offering something different. 2 days later, Patrice Motsepe, the South African mining billionaire and founder of Mamelodi Sundowns, sat across from Traoré in the presidential palace. Mr. President, Motsepe began, what you did took courage. But courage alone won't extract manganese or create jobs. Traoré nodded cautiously. I'm listening. I propose a new model, not foreign exploitation, not pure nationalization, but a true partnership. Mamelodi Sundowns will provide technology and expertise. Your government maintains 51% ownership. All extraction uses sustainable methods. No toxic waste, no bribes. Profits stay in Africa. Traoré studied the older man carefully. Why would you offer this when you could simply wait for us to fail and buy our assets for pennies? Motsepe smiled. Because I'm tired of watching African resources enrich everyone but Africans. Because I believe what you're attempting could change the continent if it succeeds, and because, frankly, it's time. This unexpected alliance marked the beginning of what would become known as the Burkinabé Model, a revolutionary approach to resource management that would eventually spread across Africa. But first, there would be pain. The transition wasn't smooth. Production fell sharply in the first months as Chinese engineers departed, taking key knowledge with them. Economic hardship spread. Opposition politicians called for Traoré's resignation. Protesters took to the streets in Ouagadougou, demanding the return of foreign investment. 6 months in, with the country's foreign reserves dwindling and international pressure mounting, even Traoré's closest allies began to question the wisdom of his decision. Perhaps we could compromise, suggested Foreign Minister Diallo during a late-night strategy session. Allow Golden Dragon back, but with stricter environmental controls? Traoré stood by the window, looking out at the capital city. When I worked in the mine disguised as a laborer, he said quietly, I met a woman named Aisha. She had 3 children working alongside her, the youngest only 9 years old. When I asked why her children weren't in school, she laughed. School? We need to eat today, not tomorrow. He turned to face his ministers. That is the system we are fighting. One that forces parents to choose between their children's future and their present survival. If we compromise now, nothing changes. Just when things seemed most dire, the first shipment of manganese processed entirely by Burkinabé workers left the Tambao mine. It was a small victory, but a significant one. The South African engineers had trained local talent faster than anyone expected. Young Burkinabé engineers, many educated abroad but unable to find work at home, returned to join the project. Gradually, production increased. The environmental cleanup began. And most importantly, the money stayed in Burkina Faso. New schools were built near the mining communities. A specialized technical college opened to train more local engineers. Healthcare facilities were established to treat those already affected by pollution. 1 year after the confrontation, Traoré returned to Tambao. The transformation was remarkable. Where toxic waste had once pooled, trees were now being planted. The processing facility, once a hazardous nightmare, now operated with state-of-the-art filtration systems. But the most profound change was in the people. Aisha, the woman Traoré had met during his undercover mission, approached him with tears in her eyes. "My children are in school now," she said, gripping his hands tightly. "And I am learning too." She proudly showed him her employee badge. She was training to become a safety supervisor. International attention returned to Burkina Faso, but the tone had shifted dramatically. "The Burkina miracle," one headline declared. "Traoré's gamble pays off," announced another. Delegations from other African nations arrived to study the Burkinabé model. Mali, Niger, and even resource-rich Nigeria sent officials to learn how they might replicate the approach. 18 months after that tense confrontation, Wei Zhang watched from Beijing as Traoré addressed the United Nations General Assembly. The young president stood confidently before world leaders, no longer the desperate gambler, but a visionary whose risk had paid off. "The exploitation of Africa's resources has a long and painful history," Traoré began. "For centuries, our wealth has enriched other continents while our people remain poor. Today, I am here to tell you that this era is ending." He outlined the principles of the Burkinabé model: majority local ownership, sustainable extraction, profits invested in education and healthcare, and technology transfer to build local expertise. "We do not seek to isolate ourselves from the global economy," he continued. "We seek to engage with it on equal terms. We welcome partners, not masters, investors, not exploiters." The speech received a standing ovation, most enthusiastically, from other African delegations. But perhaps the most surprising reaction came from an unexpected source. 2 days later, Traoré received a message from Wei Zhang requesting a private meeting. Curious, Traoré agreed. They met in a small conference room at the UN building. Zhang, no longer the arrogant executive, seemed humbled. "Mr. President," he began, "I underestimated you, and I underestimated your country." Traoré said nothing, waiting. Golden Dragon has been reconsidering its approach to African operations. Our shareholders, our government, they've seen what you've accomplished. They're impressed. Zhang hesitated. "We would like to discuss returning to Burkina Faso, under your terms." Traoré studied the man carefully. "The Burkinabé model is non-negotiable. 51% local ownership, environmental standards that would satisfy Europe, fair wages, technology transfer. Still interested?" Zhang nodded slowly. "Times are changing, Mr. President. Those who don't adapt will be left behind." As news of this conversation spread, other international mining companies began approaching Burkina Faso with similar offers. The country that had been predicted to collapse was now setting the terms of its engagement with the world. 5 years after that fateful confrontation, Burkina Faso had transformed its mining sector entirely. Foreign investment had returned, but on very different terms. The country's GDP had doubled. Child mortality had fallen by 30%. School enrollment was at an all-time high. During a ceremony marking the opening of the Tambao Technical University, built on rehabilitated mine land, Traoré reflected on the journey. 5 years ago, a foreign executive told me our country couldn't survive without exploitation, he told the gathered students and faculty. He was right about one thing: we couldn't survive that way, but we could thrive another way. He gestured to the modern campus around them. This is what happens when we value our resources properly, when we demand dignity alongside development. Among the guests was a special visitor, little Fatima's older brother, Mohammed Konate, now a first-year engineering student at the university. When asked by a journalist what he thought of President Traoré, Mohammed's answer was simple but profound. He showed us that we don't have to choose between our resources and our lives. We can have both. The confrontation that had begun with a single photograph had indeed changed the fate of Burkina Faso's resources forever. But more importantly, it had changed the story Burkina Faso, and eventually much of Africa, told about itself. Not a story of dependence, but of dignity. Not of poverty despite wealth, but of prosperity because of it. Not a continent whose resources were a curse, but one whose resources could finally become a blessing. And it had all begun with one leader's courage to say no to exploitation, even when saying yes would have been infinitely easier.